Well, we can get started. Good evening. My name is Phil Schommer. I'm the adult programmer here at Hedberg. And I want to thank everyone for coming. We're really excited to be able to have the Rock Prairie Master Gardeners here tonight. If you're not familiar, the Master Gardener program is sponsored by the University of Wisconsin Extension. And the Master Gardeners go through training in many different subjects, including things like botany, soils, entomology, and plant pathology, just to name some of them. And then they take that training out into their communities. In the past year, I believe, Master Gardeners throughout the state of Wisconsin have put in over 196,000 volunteer hours in their respective communities, so they do a great service. And we're just privileged to be able to have some of them here tonight. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Beverly Feltz, who's going to introduce you to her crew.
Hi, I'm Beverly. Welcome to Backyard Making and Using Compost in Your Backyard. I had a different title, but that's the title we're going to use tonight. We are master gardeners, but we are not master composters. Okay. My name's Beverly, and I'm going to present the first part. We're going to have a little fun over here and get dirty. And then we've got Mary Kay in green. We've got Ruth in blue, and we've got Ruth over there trying to hide in the corner. But we're all master gardeners. So today we're going to talk about the how and the why of compost, as well as the benefits of using compost in your home gardens. Can everybody hear me? Okay. On the table, I'm just going to quick, and then I'm going to get into the meat and potatoes. There's this little handout. It does not follow the slideshow that we're going to use, but it is a take-home reference for you. Talks about greens, and you'll learn about all this stuff as you go. And feel free at the end to go around and look at the different compost bins. And in a minute, we're going to see who's brave, and I'm going to ask for some volunteers. So think about whether or not you're brave enough to get up in front of people. Okay, so this presentation was developed by UW Extension to teach people how they can start composting in their backyard. As I said, we're not master composters, we're only master gardeners. And then the Master Composter program was generous enough to let us use their show and our knowledge. So let's see how we go. All right. First one up. So when we compost organic materials such as grass, clippings, leaves, brush, food, and kitchen scraps, we're using the natural process of decay. Compost turns these materials into a valuable humus-like product called compost. Why do we compost? Whoops. Got to get ahead of myself. Why do we compost? Well, for waste management. Yard waste is banned from landfills. I know it is in Madison. You can't put your waste in the bin anymore. So it encourages you to be responsible for your waste and maybe use less waste if you don't want to have to deal with it, and reduces need for municipal collection. Where did I read? Each one of us produce 650 pounds of waste each year that can be composted. That's a lot of waste that doesn't have to go in the landfill. A backyard compost pile is one day to reduce the volume of waste being sent to that landfill. You also reduce the amount of money your community spends to manage your waste. Other people start composting to produce a valuable soil amendment to enhance their garden or their landscape. High quality compost can be expensive. By making your own compost, you can control what goes into the compost and reduce the volume of compost products you need to buy. So finished compost is a valuable soil amendment. Healthy soil leads to healthy plants, leads to healthy people, and it saves money all the way around. Benefits of adding compost to your soil. Supplies organic matter. It lightens heavy soils. It improves moisture retention in sandy soils. It contains humus, which is like a soil glue, and it improves soil structure. And now I'm going to ask for volunteers. I'm going to need, I can do 3, I can do 9. Who wants to volunteer? Anybody? Nobody? All right.
He's
come
going to
on up.
volunteer. That's good.
We got 2. 1 more? All right.
What is it, all women doing?
Want it done right. I'm just kidding. So last year, 2 years ago, I took a class. As Master Gardeners, we have to do continuing education every year. And last year, or 2 years ago, I took a class on compost. And we talk about, how it lightens your soil and it does all these things. And I thought, geez, I want to see if it really works. So I went and I did my research and I found 3 kinds of soil that are prevalent around the state, not necessarily all in Janesville. And so then I said, well, let's see, how does compost improve water drainage? I also learned how it erodes things. I also learned how it changes the volume and the texture of what's going in. So what we're going to do right now, and I'm going to do them one at a time. We'll do it. It goes pretty quickly. I want you to pour your 4 cups of water in the sand. And sand, as we all know, looks like this. Right? Go ahead. Just dump one in that one. You dump it all in real fast. It doesn't matter. See how it's just pouring out of there. Let's throw this one in here. Yep, the whole thing. This is, so the first one, on all of these, the first one is straight whatever I dug up. The second one is that with 1/4 cup of compost to 1 cup of this. And now this is 1 cup of sand and 1/2 cup compost. And you can see the difference. This one's almost completely drained. You see how it's slowed down the amount of water that's coming through there. All right, now we're going to go on the end. I'm sorry I didn't ask your names. Nicole, can you pour those 3 things of water into, yep, let's start on this end though. Okay. So this is just plain a cup of clay. We all know clay, right? It's that clumpy stuff.
We dug it out of the ground locally, some from a landscaping
This
company.
one's not worked for a week, so I'm not sure what's going on here, but I even stirred it, I took it out. But the big thing is, see how this is draining out? Once it settles, and I've got pictures up here, you'll see the sediment that it has washed out into the bottom of this jar. And this one will drain in a couple days, maybe. But you can see the difference between this one and this one, how it's slowed down, how much is going out of there. And you'll also see that the sediment that's going to be in the bottom of this is a lot less than what's in here. That's what gets eroded away every time it rains. Okay? Now, okay, let's do the middle one. Start on this side. Now this is our nice dirt everybody wants to play in. Okay, so it goes through fairly quickly there. And fairly quickly there. And it'll slow it down a little bit here.
Is this potting soil?
That's potting soil, yeah. But I did add compost to each one of them. So what we see is it does change the way the water runs through the soil. In addition to changing the volume of soil, the amount of moisture it retains, how fast it drains, and as we add and it drains less, it has more opportunity to absorb the nutrients. Okay, thank you very much. Give a round of applause. We're just going to let them drip and see if this one will ever wake up here. Been working on that one for 3 days, still can't get it to drain right. But that's clay. What's the biggest problem we have with clay is you can't get it to drain. That's exactly it. Why the other one drains just like that, who knows? I guess it hasn't molded itself together. All right, so I did this one. More benefits of adding compost to your soil. Encourages vigorous root growth because it's getting all those extra vitamins and minerals. It's got airspace, it can get the water. Allows plants to more efficiently utilize nutrients. Again, it can actually get the nutrients, they're not getting washed out. Enables soils to retain nutrients. That's why they're allowed to pick them up. It buffers soil pH, so it helps balance out the soil. Supplies beneficial microorganisms that we need and feeds soil life. All right. How is compost made? Let me get caught up here. Compost is a natural process. Biological decomposition. I tried this, so I didn't mess up these words. Biological decomposition of organic matter in the presence of oxygen. Basically, it says when things rot, that's the natural process of what they're supposed to do. We're just going to take that rotting process and use it for something else. A human influence, we can speed up or slow down the process. So compost is nothing more than speeding up the natural decay process. A compost pile is used to manage the factors that affect the rate of decay. These factors are oxygen or air, water, food, and temperature. The quality of the resulting compost depends on how well you control these factors. Microbes do the work. Bacteria, including, and I'm not even going to try it. Anybody want to give that word a shot for me? Because it's...
Actinomycetes.
There we go. Say that again.
Actinomycetes.
Okay. Okay, so bacteria and that big word and fungi are some of the microbes. Chemical decomposers or enzymes, they help break down things. And all of these things are found in soil, leaves, food scraps, manure, and finished compost. So, do you need compost starters? Some garden centers and retailers sell compost starters, inoculants, or accelerators. They may, in some cases, help get the composting process started a little faster. However, they are not necessary. Rapid composting can be achieved, and high-quality compost can be produced without using these products, if you get the right combinations. So 1 teaspoon of good garden soil to which compost has been added may contain 100 million bacteria and 800 feet of fungal thread in 1 teaspoon. Yep, teaspoon. Okay. One source of organisms is your own garden soil. Small amounts of soil can be added to your compost pile to provide all the bacteria and fungi it needs to get fired up. However, you don't need to add soil. Bacteria are all over leaves, grass, and other yard materials you add to your pile. Just keep them happy and they'll multiply and work for you. Macroorganisms. Some are really small and microscopic. Some are difficult to see. Some are easier to see. All of these things help our compost pile. So we've got the microorganisms return to the pile after the pile temperatures drop. They're good indicators that the compost is continuing to break down. So you don't want to see these things, worms and that in your compost bin. Look for earthworms, sow bugs, mites, springtails, beetles, millipedes, and even snails and slugs. While some of them may be feeding on the materials you've added to your pile, many are feeding on bacteria, fungi, and other organisms in the pile. As a composter, you have created the conditions for an entire ecosystem right in your backyard. Needs for the composting process, we talked about it before. We need oxygen, it's got to have air. It needs food, which is the stuff we add to it, and it needs water because you don't want it to dry out. Just make sure I didn't miss anything. Yep. Okay. And I think Ruth's going to get more into those components of compost. So, acceptable materials or food for your decomposers. Leaves, grass clippings, and yard debris. Kitchen scraps, vegetable and fruit peels, coffee grounds, and eggshells. Used potting soil. At the end of the year, you got all those pots of dirt after everything dies, or even in the middle of the summer when we don't garden so well, just take that pot, dump it right in your compost bin. Most weeds and garden debris, weeds have to be before they seed. Once they go to seed, unless you run a really hot compost bin, it may not kill those seeds, and that compost will have those seeds in it. Paper and cardboard, toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls, those will work great for your compost bin. They're nice and small. Sawdust, hay, and straw. Manure from herbivores, so not your dog and your cat. Hair, fur, and other natural fibers help build the texture. So if we add some of each of those, we end up with really nice compost. Food to avoid. Yeah, here we go. Persistent weeds, crabgrass, quackgrass, invasive species, and weeds that have gone to seed. Meat, dairy, and oils because they can attract vermin. And you don't need them eating your compost. You want it for your plants, not the animals in the neighborhood. Cat or dog waste. I don't need to go any farther on that one. Diseased plants, again, because unless you're running a hot compost pile, it may not get hot enough to kill those diseases, and you don't want to introduce them back into your landscape. Lime and ashes, because they change the pH content. And treated lumber or sawdust, because it has arsenic in it. Treated lumber has arsenic. So that's why we don't do that. Never use pesticide-treated grass clippings as mulch. The chemicals are active for a period of time after application and can kill or damage trees, shrubs, or other plants. So you really don't want to put that in your compost bin either, because of course we don't want those chemicals to not get burnt up in the process and have them left over on something that you want to put them on. Oop, I think I got one more. Plant materials treated with pesticides, what I just said. Got ahead of myself. Some pesticides can be persistent, and again, if it's not hot enough to kill those chemicals or that virus or that disease, it will survive. Some survive the composting process, and if you use that compost that has those bad things in it, it will do bad things to your plants. Okay? Mary Kay? Or I'm sorry, Ruth's next.
Right, Ruth is next.
Lawyer.
Okay, how are we doing here? Looking, still dripping here, still dripping here. So, and the sand looks like it's pretty well run through, so we'll check in on that after a bit. Okay. There's a few things that you can put in your compost, but that you might need to think twice about or be careful with. Pine needles break down very, very slowly, so you don't want to put in more than 10% of the volume of your pile as pine needles. Walnut leaves, because walnut trees produce a toxin that can kill off. It kills off the plant, a large number of plants. Very few plants can survive underneath a walnut tree. That same toxin remains in the leaves, so if you put it in your compost, you might be putting it. Tomatoes are particularly sensitive, so you don't want to cause your tomatoes any issues. And sod, simply because it's very slow to break down. Okay, so mostly what I'm going to talk about is, we said that compost is influencing this natural process of decay. And the way that you influence it is by how you combine those three essentials that we talked about earlier: the oxygen, the food, and the water. So we're going to look at each of those in a little bit more nitty-gritty detail, and we're going to start with food. Okay, so the food is all of the organic matter that's scattered around your yard and comes out of your kitchen that you pull together into a pile all in one place to turn into compost. And the microorganisms and so forth that do it need to have, like most people, a balanced diet. And what does it feed on? It feeds on carbon and nitrogen. So those are, you can think of a basic division of those organic matters into two big categories. One of them are things that are high in carbon. And we're going to call those browns, and I'll explain that in a little more detail later. And the other ones are high in nitrogen, and we're going to call those greens. And here's something that I want you to keep in mind. If you take nothing else home with you from this class this evening, keep in mind to make the best compost, you're going to want to have, by volume, 2 to 3 parts brown material for every 1 part of green materials. Okay? And let me show you why. This top line here corresponds to that ratio where you're doing the 2 to 3 parts of brown to 1 part green. And as you can see, this is a measure of how hot is the pile getting. And at this ratio, it's heating up faster, it's staying hot longer, and it's cooling down much slower. These other lines are different ratios where it has more carbon in the mix than, this is like 6 parts of browns to 1 part green, and this is like 4 parts of brown to 1 part green. You still get good compost at those levels, but there are advantages to going hotter, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. But let's go into a little bit more detail about what we mean by brown and green. What types of things fall into which category? Some examples: leaves, straw, paper, sawdust, animal bedding with manure mixed in, wood. Those are all high in carbon, so those are browns, and they tend to be things that are more brown in color, not absolutely, but they tend to be. Greens, fresh grass clippings, vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, and fresh manure from herbivores are all they're all high nitrogen items. Those are considered greens. So this is going to be your 2 to 3 parts, and this is going to be your 1 part. Okay. Just in passing, I would say, keep in mind that some things could be either or depending on their condition. I said fresh grass clippings are greens. If they've laid out on the lawn for a week or so and they've turned pretty brown, the nitrogen is going to have evaporated a lot of it from them, and then they would go in the brown category rather than green. So use some common sense about that as you're putting things together. Characteristics of browns is that they decay really slowly, much, much slower than the greens. Another characteristic is that they tend to be coarser, they're drier, and they're tougher than the greens are. And so those coarse items help keep space within the pile that air can move through the pile, so that's good. The greens decay much faster, and because they have so much moisture in them, they tend to, you can put in a pile of fresh leaves or fresh grass clippings in particular, and it might be this fluffy, and a week later it might be this tall. And so the oxygen has a much harder time getting through there, as does the water. So without the oxygen, you get a different group of microorganisms working, and they're the ones that are going to give you a slimy and smelly mess. So you're trying to avoid those ones that work without oxygen, which are called anaerobic bacteria. A point to remember is that the browns do tend to accumulate in the fall versus the spring and summer for the greens. So you may need to gather them now and save them for next summer when you have the greens to go with them. Otherwise, next summer you're going to be saying, but I need browns. And they won't be there. So the greens, this is just material that I've already said. If the browns, which is the high carbon materials, they break down more slowly. And this little symbol here just means the carbon to nitrogen ratio. It's just browns to greens. This is at 30-to-1, that's an extraction. That's not a volume measure. That's the actual amount of carbon and nitrogen in the relative items. So, and then if you get too much nitrogen in there, there's your anaerobic material and the stinky, smelly mess. So the takeaway from the idea of how you manipulate the food is go for that ratio, 2 to 3 parts brown by volume to 1 of green. We've talked about oxygen, needing to get oxygen into the pile, and this is an interesting little graphic. Here's another fancy word. If it doesn't get enough air, we talked about aerobic. Anoxic is just, it has some oxygen, just not very much. And so, like I said, you want the aerobic bacteria, not the anaerobic. You get the stinky, smelly. And the things that make your pile out of balance and have trouble getting oxygen is that either your carbon to nitrogen ratio is off or you've got too much water in the pile. Your compost pile needs to be able to drain. And if it doesn't, the water fills up the spaces where the air should be. And so that prevents new air from getting into the pile. And too many greens can do the same thing. Over here in this graphic, we've got a couple of things stuck into the pile that are there to help the oxygen flow through. This one is just a perforated PVC pipe. It allows both the less oxygen-rich air, as the microbes are working in your pile, they take some of the oxygen out of the air that's in the pile, and they produce heat, and that heat causes the oxygen-depleted air to rise up out of the pile, and then it draws in oxygen from the sides to go into the pore spaces and to continue the process. So this clump of branches is one way to allow more air to get deeper into the pile. This, I think, it's hard to tell. I think it's just a pipe. So a couple of different ways to vent the pile and allow the air movement through the pile. So one of the main way that you get oxygen, space for the oxygen in the pile, is that you have pore spaces, and you get the pore spaces by having particles of different sizes. Some small particles, and the smaller they are, the more surface area they have that the bacteria and other microbes can cover, so they break down quicker. And some larger ones break down more slowly, so you get more pore spaces in there. And so compacted piles are not good. You need some larger, tougher things to give you structure. So you'll see over here somebody who is chipping up his brush and his leaves. You can do that if you wish, but it is not, you don't want to be putting a log in your pile. It'll break down eventually, but we're trying to hurry this process along. So if you do have small branches or stuff and you can put it through the chipper, or if you've got leaves and you can run the mower over them to break them down into a little bit smaller particles, that's a good idea. Okay. And then water. How do you use, this is another one of those, you're looking for the ideal balance. You don't want too much water because then you can't get your oxygen. And if you have too little water, if it's too dry, then your microbes aren't going to be able to work. They live in the water that borders, that coats all of the material in your pile. So ideally, you're going to want this 40 to 60% moisture level, which equates to, in common terms, about as wet as a well-wrung out sponge. And you'd be kind of surprised probably at how much water it takes to get to that level. When it rains, that doesn't always do the job because sometimes your pile will tend to shed water. So you need it to drain through the bottom, but so if you're short on water, let me go back for a second. If you're short on water in your pile, you can, if you're not sure about your water in your pile, you can reach in and grab some of the material and pull it out and take a look at it, squeeze it. If water comes out, obviously you have too much water and you may want to do something about that. So what you can do for that, if you have too much water, you can adjust it by adding either more of your browns, or you can turn the pile over and let it, or you add more browns, turn the pile over, or fluff it up, and which allows more air to get in and more water to drain out. I have a couple of tools to show you here for this. I've got, this is probably the easiest tool to use either for fluffing up or turning over the entire pile. It seems to work much better than a shovel. And then I have this odd little duck. Somebody used the term gimcrack earlier, and I guess it kind of falls in that category, but it is a compost aerator. You plunge it into your pile, and the wings open up, and you can then pull it back out again, and it will both help add moisture, it'll allow the air to get in to help dry out the pile if that's what you need to do, and help mix the materials so that you get more decomposition. As things tend to decompose starting in the center, and as you get toward the edges, it has a tougher time. And so one of the things you're going to think about doing along the way is you're going to think about remixing everything in there. Okay, so those are the things that you can influence. And one of the ways that you can know, one of the tools for knowing whether you have ideal conditions or you don't have ideal conditions is by the temperature of the pile. And they make a thermometer specifically for composters. The dial's there. The probe is long enough that you can reach all the way down into the center of your pile so that you know what's going on in the middle. So, compost will form. Sorry. Compost will form at any temperature between 55 degrees and 155 degrees, but ideal is in this 90 to 140 degree range. So that's what you're looking for. So if you're checking the temperature on a regular basis, you have some sense of where you're at. If you get it too hot, you'll kill your microbes. Okay? So if you're approaching 150, 155, you might want to think about what can you do to slow it down. And that would include adding more browns to the pile and mixing them in, or just simply turning the pile over, which disrupts the process, and then it'll begin to start building up heat again. Okay. Bev mentioned that you can, a hot compost pile is one that's over 130 degrees, and that's where you begin to kill off the pathogens and the weed seeds. And that allows you to be a little less particular about, a little less finicky about what actually goes into your pile, so that you don't have to worry so much about the safety of what comes out of your pile, or the amount of work that you generate by planting a bunch of weeds when you really meant to just put in compost. Okay. Does your compost have to get hot? Like I said, it'll make compost anywhere between 55 and 155, so it doesn't have to get that hot, but it'll take longer, it'll take twice as long to get to the finished stage, and you may have more problems with enough air, enough water, too many browns, okay? those are all reasons why it might not get as hot as you think it might. So it can be an indicator that not enough is happening there and that you may want to do something to adjust the process. Okay, so we talked about those already. So I think, last thing, how big a pile do you need to have? If you get too small a volume, it can't build up enough heat, okay? So if we look at something like about a cubic yard, 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, that allows you to get high enough. It's enough volume that you can get over your 130 degrees without too much difficulty. And it's fairly easy to manage. So if you've got a composter, let's say like something like this, where you just have wire that you've clipped together. If you use some sort of simple clips to hold it together like that, you can take this off, move it over, clip it back together, and then take your handy dandy fork and just put the pile back in there. And then you want to try to move the stuff that's on the outside to the inside so that it gets processed along the way. So, and that's fairly easy to maneuver and deal with as a single person. Bigger piles, municipal compost pile, unless you've got a bobcat or a front end loader, it gets to be too much. So, Mary's going to pick up from here and talk some more about finishing your compost and using it.
Thanks, Ruth. Hi, I'm Mary, as she said. One of the things that you're going to want to do when you get into this venture of composting, thank you, is to set up a strategy for yourself. Figure out what you want to do. What are your goals? Do you want to have long-term composting that's going to take between 6 months and 2 years? Or do you want to have short-term composting, hot composting that's going to last about 3 months and it'll be all done and ready to use? Depends on what you've got in your yard. Do you have a big yard? Do you have a small yard? Do you have access to more materials? Where are you getting your materials? Are they all coming from your yard, or are you going to the landfill and getting bags of leaves, which is, by the way, has its own hidden risks? You need to form some kind of a strategy. So part of that is going to be these little guys, all of the different types of bins. Now you have on your table a small little half sheet. And on the half sheet are all of these designs for these different kinds of compost bins. And thanks to Ruth, over in the corner, Ruth, and Beverly, we have all of these little demonstrations of these little physical representations of what these different types of compost bins might look like and what they can give you, what they can provide you. So, to begin with, you want to choose a strategy that's going to work well for you. It's going to depend on the amount of materials, which I said a moment ago. Excuse me, I never know if I should have these down where I can't see you or up where I can see you. Sorry. Okay, it's going to depend on the number of materials that you are composting. So, are you going to be composting kitchen scraps? Probably. Garden scraps? Most definitely if you're a gardener. Are they going to be hot piles or cool piles? You might find that putting more time into managing will result in compost being created in a shorter amount of time. So if you're going to be spending more time out there in the yard managing your compost pile, you may get results quicker. As a matter of fact, you can get them in as quickly as 12 weeks. Oops, what did I do here?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Hot pile process takes about 3 months. You need to plan ahead, which means you need to store some browns, you need to store some greens. Cool piles process takes 1.5 to 2 years. Add the minimum materials as they accumulate, less effort. So this is, honey, take the stuff out and throw it on the compost pile, won't you? This is after dinner. And of course you do. So when you have eggshells and banana peelings and lettuce leaves
Eggplant peels.
on top, don't leave it there. Toss it in. You have your little, pardon me?
Fork.
Thank you. You have your little fork right there beside the pile. Mix it in as you go. But,
They're greens. Throw some browns on top.
right. If you want a hot pile, you need to build it all at one time. And it must be tended often. The compost will be ready in about 12 weeks. And the benefits are, it's faster than the cool method, and it can reduce the number of viable weed seeds. That's an important one, especially if you have accidentally or inadvertently put waste weeds with seeds into your compost bin. Okay, so hot compost pile. Mix 2 to 3 volumes of browns and 1 of green, just like we said before. Water as you add your materials. You can inoculate it, as Ruth mentioned before, with a little bit of soil. But you don't need to buy an inoculant from the garden store. Weekly, you turn the pile for the first 4 to 6 weeks. Keep it moving. Every Saturday morning you go out and you turn your pile. Then bi-weekly for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then you leave it alone. You let it cure, which means letting it stand without turning, for 4 weeks after the pile begins to cool. In 3 months, you will have nice, usable compost. Like this.
Do you want me to pass the bucket around?
Could you?
Sure.
I would appreciate that, Ruth. Thank you. Okay. Now, cool and easy composting, which is our next option, can be built as things accumulate. So it's less intensive management. You're not out there once a week turning the pile. And it can take 6 months to 2 years. But eventually everything will be, or most everything will be, decomposed. It's a good method for kitchen scraps. But you need to save your browns to cover your pile. Leaves and straw make good browns for this. Pile turning tips. Ruth did go into that a little bit. Mix the materials from the outside to the middle. Open the pore space. Use your garden fork or a shovel. Add water if necessary. And you can have that little mixer like we have there for compost as well. To bin or not to bin? Well, we have lots of different examples of different types of bins over here.
Like and feels
and you
like
have
soil.
a list in front of you that is from the University of Wisconsin Extension.
That's awesome.
And these are available online. There are 7 different designs. 7 different designs, all of which any one of us could make. And these things will help you achieve your goals. You can use pallets, wire,
And it just looks and feels like dirt.
concrete blocks. You can use a trash can with holes.
Smells good too.
You can make a roller, also a trash can with a tight fitting lid that you can roll. Or maybe some wire mesh with some wooden stakes. These are all free online. And we'll go into in a little while how you can find all of those materials. You can also use a heap, just an an unrestrained heap of compost, a pile, a trench, or a sheet, and they all have aesthetic concerns. Your neighbor's going to come over and, what are you going to do about that pile of stuff you got in the backyard? Anything? It can be a problem. Bins can be home built or manufactured. I went out and looked when we were getting ready for this program. I went out and looked at different types. And there are some nice little rotating ones, a little handle. They have a little stand. They're about $70 that are really worth every penny. That would be easy if you needed to make some fast, hot compost. They'd be perfect for that. And here are some examples of home-built bins, the big boy examples of those small ones. Wooden wire, concrete block 3-bay. And this goes back to what Ruth was talking about moving it from point A to point B to point C. Or you could also use this as a storage unit for your browns and have your compost going here and just turn it by hand. All wood, wooden pallets, good way to recycle something that can be a real eyesore. And just plain old ordinary wire mesh in a loop. Very simple. Okay. Commercial bins. This is very much like the one I was talking about, only the one that I really took a shine to, I found at Menards. It was probably about this tall. It's the only one I could find. Merchants aren't carrying these anymore. You can buy them online. There are plenty of them online. They just aren't out there in the stores anymore. I asked why, and one of the guys said, well, nobody bought them. So you can make your own. The designs are simple. There are a number of things that you want to do. Where do you want to put your pile? Well, you want to put it where the compost will be used. This picture is a perfect example. This is a garden. Perfect spot. 2 feet or more from buildings, that makes sense. Good drainage also makes sense. Away from water wells. If you have a well, not a good idea to put a compost bin right next to it that'll have chicken manure or cow manure or horse manure in it. Be a good neighbor. Build as attractive a compost bin as possible. Keep it neat and tidy. Make sure that it doesn't become an eyesore. And check, by all means check, about local ordinances. This is important. There may be ordinances in your community that say that it's just not the right thing to do if you're going to compost in town. Troubleshooting. Nothing's happening. What's the matter with my compost pile? Well, it could be too dry. It might not have enough greens. Worst problem, my pile stinks. Okay, too wet, excess greens, pile is compacted, and you may have pests, buzzing little critters that are hovering around this compost pile. One thing that you need to be very careful about is using grass clippings in your compost. They make excellent greens. There's no doubt about it. They make excellent greens. And they also compact just terribly. If you don't turn your pile regularly on your 1 week rotation, you're going to have this slab with mold in it. So be careful when using grass for greens. Using compost. So gardens, flower beds, lawns, and houseplants even. Clay soil, it improves the drainage and the tilth. We've seen that over here. Sandy soil, it increases the moisture holding capability. All soils, it improves the soil texture. It also adds to all soils nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and micronutrients, all the things that plants need to grow. When the composting process should be finished, and finished is also known as mature or stable compost, it's a dark, loose, crumbly mixture. Organic materials are unrecognizable. You shouldn't be able to look at it and see anything that looks like a banana peel. And it should be at ambient temperature. If you stick your hand into this finished compost, you shouldn't feel a warm spot in the middle. A simple test for mature compost. I love this. This is a really great and very simple way to do this. You do a germination test. Will seeds germinate in the compost? It's a good test to use for potting soil, if you're going to be using this as potting soil. Bag test. You seal the compost in a plastic bag for 5 to 7 days. When you open it up, you sniff. Does it smell bad, or does it just smell like good earth? Compost use. Unfinished compost can pull nutrients from the soil where it is placed. Make sure, before you use it, that it passes one of the two tests that was shown on the previous slide. Compost can be screened to remove larger particles with something like this, which Ruth, in her genius, put together herself. If you would like, I can pass this around for you. Basically, you just run your compost through that and it'll catch all the big hunks. All of those large pieces that didn't finish composting can be put back in as browns into the next bunch of compost. So it will help you remove the larger particles, and it's necessary if you're using this for a top dressing. If you're going to be using this on your flower beds, like say along your path up to the front of the house, or in your flower beds, foundation plantings, you want that to look nice. You want it to look smooth and nice. This helps using that type of screen. Okay. If you want to use it to help as a nutrient, you can mix 2 inches into the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. You can do it under trees like this. And you can see these flower beds here, all being prepared with using compost. You can use it as a side dressing or a mulch, 1 to 3 inches, no deeper than 3 inches. You can top dress lawns with it up to half an inch of screened compost. Composting key points, the things to remember when you go into this thing. It needs to have a balanced diet. You need to keep the pile damp, but not too damp. Remember the simple little test. Grab a handful and squeeze. If you open it up and it stays together and starts to gently fall apart, that's about right. If you get water, not good. Turn the pile when you need to. And I would recommend, if you want hot compost, keep a little journal with dates. Put it on your smartphone. Got to turn the compost pile tomorrow morning. Make sure you keep it regular and you'll get what you want. Okay, in this presentation, we have reached the end of the presentation. This presentation was developed by Joe Van Rossum from the University of Wisconsin Extension for use in the Master Composter program. And again, I want to emphasize, we are not master composters. The goal of this class tonight is not to teach you how to be master composters. It's to teach you how to have a little bitty compost pile in the back of your yard. So thanks, everyone.